A very warm welcome to you, Africa and the world. This is Africa Speaks, where your voice matters and your stories shape the narrative. I'm your host, Makiza Latifa, and today we turn our lenses to the east of the continent, to a nation standing tall in resilience and revolution, Kenya. Known for its rich culture, digital vibrancy, and political activism, is once again on the brink of monumental change. For weeks, the streets of Nairobi, Mombasa, Kisumu, and beyond have been flooded with the relentless chants of protesters rallying against the Finance Bill 2024, a bill that many believe threatens the economic survival of ordinary Kenyans. In a country where the youth make up more than 75% of the population, their voices are now thundering through the streets, demanding justice, accountability, and a system that serves the people, not oppresses them. So on today's edition of Africa Speaks, we ask the tough questions. What sparked the unrest? What are the people demanding, and what does this mean for the future of civic resistance and democratic governance on the continent? To unpack this in depth, our Spotlight segment is coming your way with Daniel Otuasante, who will break down the Finance Bill's controversial provisions, the grassroots mobilization it has sparked, and the political implications for President William Ruto's government. Stay with us because Africa is speaking, and today Kenya is roaring.
Good evening. Tonight on Africa Speaks Spotlight segment, we'll be looking at the situation in Kenya, where a youth uprising, socialist organization, and grassroots rebellion are challenging austerity, corruption, and repression. In the last week of June, massive protests swept Kenya as huge number of people took to the street on the first anniversary on the Gen Z protests of 2024. Police fired tear gas and ammunition at protesters, and at least 16 people were killed, with hundreds arrested and scores abducted by security forces. Just few weeks before, another round of mass protests took place, sparked by the death of blogger Albert Ojwang in police custody. The protesters who were on the streets on June 25th were paying tribute to the over 60 people who were killed in 2024 when a massive uprising took place against President William Ruto's financial bill. The bill sought to increase taxes and was fiercely resisted by the people who marched to parliament and braved police violence. Shaken by the resistance, Ruto was forced to withdraw the bill and fire his entire cabinet. The protest also expanded and covered a wide variety of demands, including structural changes in government, police, and parliament. The protesting youth also came out strongly against the role of the IMF and the World Bank in dictating Ruto's policy, including the financial bill. A unique aspect of the protest was that it did not only limit itself to traditional, religious, or ethnic mobilization, and was pan-Kenyan. William Ruto came to power in 2022, claiming to be an outsider and promised to improve the plight of the working class Kenyan. However, he failed to keep his words. Kenya is an extremely unequal society, with its super rich expected to grow at 80% over the next decade, even as 2.6 million people fall into poverty each year due to illness. The country is losing $1 billion a year to tax exemption and incentives. Ruto wants to increase the tax base of the country, not by targeting the super rich, but by squeezing the working class. Meanwhile, youth employment is at nearly 60%, and Ruto is pursuing a strategy of privatization, starting with the Kenyan Pipeline Company IPO and securitization of public assets. The continuing economic stallment and political insensitivity has been made worse by the extent of repression. The continuous mobilization in response indicates that Kenya's youth will not be satisfied with the old way of doing things. This youth and socialist collective are forging a new political dynamic fueled by digital defiance and ground-leveling organization. The challenges before the Kenyan protesters are many. How do they deal with the continuing repression by the security agencies? How can they keep mobilizing despite everyday repression? How can they pursue justice for the victims of the repression and ensure more accountability from the police and government? What kind of pressure can lead to a more sustainable and systematic change in the country? How can foreign players such as the US be contained? What kind of alternative vision is required? These are more than protests. They are a political battle for Kenyan soul. Will the movement institutionalize itself? Will socialism emerge from the streets and fields, or will the elites re-entrench? But either way, Kenya's Gen Z and leftists are acutely aware, and this is not a protest, but a revolution in motion. Stay tuned as Africa Speaks continue to follow this defining moment. My name still remains Danny Otuesante. Do enjoy the rest of the show.
Thank you very kindly, Daniel. If you're just joining us, we are discussing the ongoing unrest in Kenya, a nation gripped by historic anti-government protest against the controversial Finance Bill 2024. But beyond the streets and social media hashtags lies a deeper structural discontent. Economic inequality, state repression, and a frustrated generation of young people desperate for change have all converged in this moment. So to help us make sense of this resistance and unpack the underlying forces driving Kenya's protest culture, we are honored to be joined by a man who's been at the front line of social justice activism and political mobilization in East Africa, Buka Ingesa Omole, General Secretary of the Communist Party, Marxist Kenya.
So from the Communist Party Marxist perspective, we have an up-to-date on the current crisis that we are facing in our country. And we also try to draw certain comparisons of what happened in the street last year and its continuation this year that started on not just on June 25th, but it's important also to understand that before June 25th, there were several excesses of President William Samoei Ruto's state in terms of repressing the Kenyan masses, not to turn June 25th as a way to challenge mainly the corrupt regime that exists in our country. Because June 25th is an important day for majority of the young people. Last year on June 25th, the young people staged a breach on the Kenyan parliament. And that ended up with some minimal successes. These minimal successes were the financed the IMF World Bank sponsored finance bill that was being enforced upon the Kenyan majority and the neoliberal policies that ended up with very punitive austerity measures that made the lives of the working people extremely difficult. So this crisis reached its peak on June 25th, and the price was huge for the young people in the street. The Communist Party Marxist Kenya lost 18 of its cadres last year on June 25th. And the entire number of people that were murdered on June 25th last year was 67. So June 25th this year was to celebrate our martyrs. In fact, the Communist Party Marxists declared that June 25th will be a day to raise the banners of the martyrs since independence, not just the 67 that were murdered by the Ruto regime, but also to make it a day to reclaim the legacy of our true heroes from independence, from the Mau Mau War of Independence that led to the martyrdom of Dedan Kimathi, our national hero. So this was the protest that started last year. This protest was against, of course, the crisis of imperialism, the crisis of capitalism, that the majority of the young people in our country cannot access life with dignity, that the majority of the working people cannot make clear decisions on how their produce is being utilized and how they can survive when their children are out of school because they don't have money to pay school fees, that the landlord has closed their houses because they cannot pay their monthly rentals, that the excesses of the police state led to murder or extrajudicial killing of young people in the poor Nairobi neighborhoods. These are objective, material issues that cannot be resolved through just discussions as the regime wants to resolve it, because the current corrupt regime and the opposition have completely united. The class that oppresses the Kenyan people have completely united, and they want to cheat the masses that they can dialogue around the issues on crisis of imperialism without actually resolving it. This is what has been the case. So we realized that during this repression towards the June 25th celebration, this led to the murder of Albert Ojwang. It also led to the murder of Comrade Rose Njeri. But the Albert Ojwang's murder and Rose Njeri's murder resulted into very violent, sporadic uprising across the country that led to several police stations being torched and even some police officers being beaten, because the Kenyan masses were very angry, especially the case of Albert Ojwang that was arrested. He was arrested in his rural home in the presence of his father and was taken, 480 kilometers away from his ancestral home and murdered inside a police station at Central Police Station. This is really cruel that a young teacher that was only posting about the crimes of this government on social media was arrested in the presence of his father in the rural home, transported several kilometers away to the capital city, Nairobi, and murdered inside the police station. And then the police issued a statement that Albert Ojwang committed suicide inside the police station by knocking his head on the wall, while the report from the post-mortem report indicated that he suffered broken ribs, he was beaten by blunt objects on his head, and this caused a lot of anger among the Kenyan people. So before the June 25th raptures, there was a lot of demonstrations, small demonstrations countrywide in the street, especially to reject the repression that the government had intensified in the run-up to June 25th protests. Because the government knew that the Kenyan poor, the Kenyan majority, would like to make a statement on June 25th that they have rejected President William Samoei Ruto as the administrator of the neo-colonial state, that they have rejected the Kenya Kwanza regime that acts on its own interest and the interest of its imperialist partners abroad and does not care about the Kenyan people. So the Kenyan people turned out in large numbers on June 25th to make it clear to this government. Actually, it was a total red card because the total 47 counties rose up against President Ruto's administration. Anyway, the result was even worse because since June 25th to July 7th, the police has murdered 41 of our comrades and disappeared 18. We do not know where 18 comrades are, whether they are being held in police custody, whether they have been killed. So we are still looking for 18 comrades, while 41 comrades have been murdered by the state. And this is why every time we say we call for global solidarity to reject this neo-colonial state and to show clear solidarity with the Kenyan people. Now, on the July 7th, it's an important day because in the 1980s, particularly during the reign of dictator Moi, the July 7th was known as a day to reject dictator Moi because that is the crackdown that killed hundreds of protesters under dictator Moi. So every time on Sabasaba Day, the Communist Party and all other revolutionary organizations, progressive organizations, and civil society organizations turn out in the street in large numbers to remember the martyrs during the more than 20 years that Moi imposed his dictatorship, of course, assisted by Washington, to make sure that the majority of the people that opposed his rule were either sent to exile, exterminated by the state, or at the very least, arrested without prosecution or detention without trial. So this is the significance of the July 7th. Now, again on the July 7th, the masses had announced that they will be on the street to make sure that their voices are heard and to make sure that President William Samoei Ruto again is demonstrated to, that nobody likes him because he is a hired puppet that manages the Kenyan affairs on behalf of imperialism. It ended with another death or deaths. 548 people are being detained in several police stations across Kenya. Today, the judge sitting in Machakos issued an unconstitutional order to hold those comrades that have been held incommunicado, that are being threatened to be charged on various trump-up charges, arson, destruction of property, murder. We know who killed the people. It was the police that killed the people alongside a state militia. Because now, since the June 25th uprising and the July 7th uprising, the police has been acting alongside hired criminals in the name of state militia, because the police fears to commit crimes because they will be held accountable by the 2010 Constitution and the Kenyan people. And now we have seen President William Samoei Ruto using gangs armed with crude weapons to murder people in the streets, to get them out of their houses. This is what is making the Kenyan people even more angry, and even inciting them to go back to the streets. So the main source of the anarchy in Kenya is none other than President William Samoei Ruto, according to our correct perspective as CPMK. Because with him staying at the helm of power, with now opinion polls suggesting that almost 94% of adult Kenyans have rejected President William Samoei Ruto, then the only way that he can continue to impose his will is through the state violent apparatus. So we have military on our streets. We have killer squads that are under government directives that are moving in unmarked cars in what they are calling the red zones. This is Kitengela, this is Ngong, this is Nanyuki, in areas that has been alienated from the national economy, and even where the Communist Party Marxist has its strength in terms of organization, the Kenyan government has driven us with crude violence. And what was left on July 8th were only dead bodies in the streets on Ngong Road and Kitengela. A complete audit is yet to be done. In fact, the Kenya National Human Rights Commission has released a preliminary number of deaths at 67. But we know that these deaths, particularly the one that was observed in Rongai on the 7th night, most of the dead people that were murdered by the police are still missing. So the numbers will clearly go up. We started at 41, we are at 67. We don't know how much of the 18 disappeared comrades are still alive. So in comparison to the number of people that were murdered last year, in a period of 2 months, in less than 1 month, Ruto has murdered more than 40 comrades, that innocent young comrades, innocent protesters in the streets, with an aim to spread state terror and discourage people from going to the street. However, the Kenyan people have resisted this state-sponsored terror and are willing to continue to occupy the streets in all major cities, in all major countries, in all major counties, to demonstrate their anger, to demonstrate their dissatisfaction, and of course, to stand in defiance on the indirect imperial rule that is being imposed upon us by President William Samoei Ruto with the clear support of the West. In fact, we have been actually thinking that if the United States imperialism was not complicit around the state-sponsored terror and murder in our country, they will have started a propaganda war against the regime. But why are they not starting that propaganda war? Because they know that the President William Samoei Ruto's Kenya Kwanza administration is totally aligned to the United States imperialism. In fact, After declaring Kenya a non-NATO major ally, we have seen the expansion of the military infrastructure of United States imperialism in our country. In fact, the unmanned drones that is being manufactured in the northern will soon be used to murder innocent Kenyan people that oppose this regime. So Kenya is also being used as a launchpad for United States imperialism in his offensive within the region. In actual sense, the state do not want to respond to the needs of the Kenyan people. President William Samoei Ruto will not stop killing the Kenyan people until the Kenyan people actually stop him from killing, because we cannot negotiate to sustain his dictatorship and to help him overcome this crisis of imperialism only by retaining him in power. They have proposed yesterday what they are calling a robust dialogue, intergenerational dialogue, which is another tactic by now the so-called broad-based government by Raila Amolo Odinga, the head of the opposition, and President William Samoei Ruto to try and make sure that they can arrest the crisis in the streets by postponing the crisis. If President William Samoei Ruto wanted people to get out of the street permanently, then he should have severed the Kenya being a client state of the United States. He could have started the deliberate process to develop the Kenyan productive forces. He could have started large-scale agriculture, large-scale mechanization of agriculture. He could have started robust industrialization program. He could have started social programs to give dignity in line with the Constitution, where every person, every Kenyan is entitled to jobs with dignity, is entitled to health care. These are the only things that can remove the Kenyan young people out of the street. Any other dream by President William Samoei Ruto to expand the state terror and to make sure that young people can die through the bullets, we could only clearly say that it will worsen the crisis and generate its negation in the street, because young people are only saying that if the President William Ruto continues to kill the people in the street, then the AK-47 is the equalizer. This is important for President William Samoei Ruto to get, and his sponsors, that if he continues to kill Kenyans by using arms, then the only ways that Kenyans will protest will not be peaceful, but also to oppose his government through the exact violence that it continues to met on the innocent Kenyan people. So this is important, that the Kenyan people have no option at the moment other than to carry out their revolution to its revolutionary and logical conclusion, without weakening imperialism, without defeating the neocolonial state, without defeating the big landlords that have captured the state, without defeating the big thieving comprado rich billionaires. The Kenyan people will continue to suffer want, to suffer disease, to suffer illiteracy. This is important. So the current direction of the Kenyan economic policy is still in line with neoliberalism. In fact, the Finance Bill 2025 have even taken more privileges from the poor and handed them to the rich. The corporates have benefited through reduction of income, not just income tax, but corporate tax. The higher middle class, the rich middle class that have been employed, that are earning salaries of up to 500,000 shillings and above, has gotten reprieve in terms of income tax. We have seen expansion of tax holidays and subsidize water and electricity for multinationals that are operating in economic processing zones, which are mainly modern day slavery labor camps in our country, while we haven't seen any attempt to expand and put up social safety nets to protect the most vulnerables in the position. So the Kenyan economic policy is still firmly held between the teeth of imperialism. There has not been a change in policy direction at all, even though the crisis continues to expand. The majority of the Kenyan people continue to die of curable diseases, and the majority of the Kenyan people continue not even to be able to afford 2 meals a day. So we do not expect a brighter future under this regime. So we need to continue to expand our organization. And even though millions, now we know for a fact that some 8 million people were in the streets across, with Nairobi alone having 2 million people coming up on the streets. So you can see the numbers that are on the street, even though we have not been able to scale up our organization to meet this sporadic uprising, but we are using it to consolidate and organize our ranks to make sure that we can have a conscious uprising against this indirect imperial regime under the dictatorship of President William Samoei Ruto. In terms of any attempts to give justice, none. In fact, there has not been any organized or systemic or even apology to the people that have been, the families that have suffered in the hands of this criminal regime. The President William Samoei Ruto have identified people that probably were killed and belonged to Raila Amolo Odinga's tribe to actually reward them with what he calls his personal money. So we have seen some 1.5 million being given to Albert's family. But all this has not been in a way to address the injustices that have been meted upon the majority of the Kenyan people. It has only been a way to make sure that Ruto can actually amend and firm his relationship with Raila Amolo Odinga when the people that have been murdered comes from his backyard. But the majority of the people that have been murdered by this state are still waiting for justice. William Samoei Ruto and Kenya Kwanza regime will not give them justice. In fact, the only option will be to take political power and to administer revolutionary justice to give dignity to the poor people that have been murdered in these streets. This is important because without political power, there will be no way to confiscate the wealth of the robbers. There will be no way to administer justice for the poor people for the first time. And any regime that comes in that do not want to sever its relationship with the past and the imperial rule in the United States will continue with the neoliberal policies and only continue to make sure that the majority of the Kenyan poor people can die in useless tribal wars and be murdered by the state without those who actually commanded them to be murdered being held responsible. So this is the attitude of the current regime that we have. And for us, we are calling out the Kenyan people, all the national democratic forces to join hands together. We are calling upon the international, calling upon for international solidarity from the majority of the residents of the world that actually are against United States imperialism and their local puppets to continue to show permanent and unconditional solidarity with the Kenyan people, with the Kenyan struggle, with the CPMK that I serve as the General Secretary. This is what we actually see as leading us to the most acceptable outcome, which is the Kenyan Revolution.
Welcome back. Now, it's one thing to analyze events from afar, but it's another to hear directly from the heart of those at the front line. In this next segment, we bring you voices on the ground, raw and filtered accounts from the young activists, organizers, and everyday citizens in Kenya who have taken to the streets in defiance of the finance bill, in protest against what they call economic oppression and state betrayal. These are the voices that mainstream narratives often sideline, but here on Africa Speaks, they take center stage. Let's cross over now and listen to what some of them had to say.
What's happening currently in Kenya is that there is a lot of repression and suppression from the state. Kenya has become a police state. We've seen a lot of violence, a lot of arbitrary arrests, a lot of abductions going on, and a lot of killings. And even we've seen the government giving a shoot to kill order. And even recently, just yesterday, the president came out and said that now don't kill them. Go ahead and just shoot their legs, So we've seen a government that is openly coming out and saying that they're actually giving a go-ahead to police to actually kill its own people. We've seen a government that is hiring and even equipping militia, to come to protest and attack peaceful protesters. So currently we've seen a government that does not care about its people. We've seen a government that is adamant about going ahead using violence, and that is state-sponsored militias and police. Any gathering, even sending goons, the militia to human rights institutions, like our organizations, to come and disrupt just meetings, normal meetings where people are just meeting to have conversations, to discuss about the state of the nation. You've seen the government send militias to go and disrupt such meetings. The government is afraid of young people who are just going out to the streets to demand for their rights, to demand for freedom, to demand for dignity. We like carrying a flag. If you've seen carrying a Kenyan flag right now, it's like a criminal act. So the government, our current government, is being run by criminals, by terrorists who do not care about human life, who do not care about anyone but themselves, and they're puppets for the US. They only care about what the US think about them, what the IMF tell them, but not what the people really want. Just coming out to demand for justice for the people who have been killed has been turned to another massacre. The government has killed innocent people in the streets who are demanding for justice for the people who have been killed by the government, who are demanding an end to suppression and repression. The government is surveilling on organizations that are fighting against violations in this country, following people to their homes and abducting them. So it's been chaotic. It's been a lot of violence. We've witnessed a lot of violence, a lot of chaos. Government going to people's homes and shooting lives. Children have died. Young people have died. You see the statistics of the people who were killed on the streets. You see very young people who have died. So for us, we are dealing with a government that does not care about its people. What we are doing currently as an organization is to participate, to mobilize people, to organize people. We are holding local assemblies for people to understand what is happening currently, because the government is trying to turn this whole fight to a tribal war. And this is not a tribal war. People have come out to say they are not tribalistic. They have fought again. We've tried to actually run down the narrative that we're tribalistic, because we are not. This is not a tribal issue. This is a citizen issue. The people want dignity. So what we're doing as an organization is to mobilize and organize people around that, for them to understand what is really happening, to understand what they need to do, because what we need to do currently is not to be intimidated by the state. It's not to fear, because we cannot afford to fold back. Is to actually go on fighting for our rights, to go on fighting for our freedom as a people, because we're currently not living in a country that has freedom. And what our demands is that we are pushing that the government, that the people who have been killed access justice. One, so the police officers who have committed murder and these killings should be held accountable. We are also demanding that state respect court orders, because that is not what's happening currently, and the state respect human life and respect our constitution as a people, because that is not happening. We have our constitution guarantees right to life, guarantees freedom of expression, and currently that is not happening in Kenya. And lastly, we call on anyone, our comrades and other people from anywhere, everywhere in Africa, outside Africa, globally, to come out and stand in solidarity with Kenyans. We are fighting a cause that is we are fighting for the people to have dignity. We are fighting for the people to have land, to have food, to have freedom, because that is what our struggles are. The struggle that the Kenya Land and Freedom Army were fighting is the struggle that is still continuing. At independence, we never got our land, we never got our freedom, and our food is being colonized day by day. So what our struggle right now is for food, land, and freedom, and we are calling on everyone to come and stand in solidarity with us, to offer support, to highlight, to actually share what is happening in Kenya so that the world knows. Our President Ruto just continues saying that Kenya is a democratic country. That's not true. Kenya is not a democratic country. You can't have a democratic country that people are not allowed to speak, are not allowed to air their grievances. So we are calling on everyone to come and stand in solidarity with us and support us, as we also support the struggle of other people who are struggling for their liberation and for their freedom.
And what is happening in Kenya is not different with the other African country that has been experiencing social and political upheavals because of the policies of IMF and World Bank and neoliberal policies. It started last year when the government trying to impose IMF-sponsored bill to tax Kenyans heavily. And then from there, Kenyans organized, and especially grassroots social justice movement, organized a protest against the bill. And then it's built up from this year when people were doing, and that time bill was withdrawn. And this year in June 25th, it was remembering the victim of police brutality that happened last year that people are commemorating. Although it started some weeks of June, early weeks of June, when one young man, a primary teacher, was killed, called Albert Ojwang, and he died in a police custody. And this triggered more mobilization and more protests against police killing, which culminated to the memorialization as Gen Z in June 25th, which is what triggered a broad-based youth that were challenging the William Ruto dictatorship and fascism that is connected with economic challenges of huge debt in this country, unemployment with youth, and police brutality that has been systematic since last year, June. Okay, last year when the government had proposed the bill, and this also started with our Mathare Social Justice Center organizing a protest against a forced eviction. Then it culminated of the us opposing the finance bill. At that time, the government, due to pressure, and it was very massive, and many other people joined together with the grassroots social movement. They came and joined the protest, and all classes that are being oppressed by this, they joined. That time, the government heeded the call of the people. They withdrew IMF-sponsored bill that had been had a draconian exploitative taxation for the basic needs like milk, baby formula, and all things that are basic, maize meal, medicine. It was horrible. It was really robbing a lot of people livelihoods. Then that time the government had the call and they withdrew the bill. Although they later, in the course of the year, they introduced it in piecemeal. But this year it was memorialization in memory of the victims of the extrajudicial killing that happened during the protest. And that's what happened in June 25th. Yes, our organization, the Mathare Social Justice Center, has been the front line campaigning and articulating the issues and the alternative and demanding accountability, stop of police brutality, abduction, and demanding an alternative economic programs that can give people an employment and provide people with the livelihoods. But this has not been this government has not been listening. From yesterday, it has been profiling the human rights defenders, social justice activists, and detaining many of comrades with the trapped malicious charges. Although comrades have been demanding for accountability and demanding the president to heed the call of the people, this has not happened. And that's why yesterday, Sabasaba, this protest continued in demand for accountability and social justice. The regime itself, as it, the crisis of the neocolonial state Africa, it is not heeding the call of the people. That's why it has continued to deploy militia, illegal detention, malicious prosecution of our people, and this telling that is the last days of this regime, because it is has applied very horrible police brutality and crackdown. And but Kenyans have not given up. Their resilience has continued, and youth are coming out and demanding that the regime must resign, because it has lost legitimacy to rule after killing many young people. Like today, the number of the people have been killed are 31 young people. So this regime, can't rule, as young people say, it can't rule us. At the same time, it has blood on their hands. And that's the challenge that we are facing. And this might be protracted struggle until this regime resign. And also it will be a protracted struggle to create an economic model that can be able to include many of the young people who are jobless. They have education, but they don't have a job. Healthcare has collapsed. Education has collapsed. So this is the situation we are facing. It's a neoliberal crisis that is bringing in a fascist state of William Ruto. At the moment, we need solidarity, because a lot of our comrades are being detained. They are being detained with trumped charges. The dictatorship is trying to introduce illegal detentions and trying to overthrow some of the progressive constitutional laws that we have that have protected the rights to assemble, to picket, to demonstrate. So the regime is trying to introduce very harsh and draconian legislations to stop people from organizing. And now people are facing trapped charges that are even imposing to a very prohibitive cash bail. So for people to be released systematically, the regime is becoming very fascist and using police to detain people and abductions. So what we need is solidarity, and especially issuing a statement to demand the regime to stop harassing social justice activists, to demand the release of many of young people who are detained in various prison and cells in Kenya, and also visit our embassies in Ghana, in South Africa, in Zimbabwe, and everywhere, and demand that we need the regime to cede on the demand of the people of Kenya. As it happened last year, many people gave us solidarity. There was a call for the regime to respect the human rights and to respect the constitution. I think that's also we need at the moment, because of the regime is using goons or a violent organized group to try and disperse or trying to stop peaceful and armed youth to assemble and articulate their vision. This is what it's doing. The regime has resorted in anarchism, trying to stop the progressive voices to organize. So this is what we need, a platform to articulate our vision, and also give many other young people who are saying that this neoliberal regime has failed completely, it has lost legitimacy, and it needed to resign and stop continuing using police and army to stop alternative leadership that has alternative economic model. for our liberation. As our Mathare Social Justice Center, we have proposed we need a new economic model, and these IMF-sponsored programs has failed completely. That is taxing working class people from nothing, and that's the challenge that we are facing. But we need solidarity around Africa and progressive forces, working class forces in the world to come to our aid, and especially condemning the brutalization and illegal detention of progressive forces and the registration of progressive organizations that are organizing mass and working class people.
Gripping words from the streets of Kenya. A nation speaking truth to power, and a youth refusing to be silenced. You're still watching Africa Speaks here on Pan-African Television. So you see, as the voices rise and the streets speak, one word keeps echoing through every chant, every speech, and every demand for change. And that brings us to our word of the day, the word shaping conversations of the continent this week. Today's word is reforms, a word that means change, restructuring, and the deliberate effort to fix systems that no longer serve the people. In Kenya, it's what protesters are demanding. In Egypt and South Africa, it's what activists are calling for on a global scale. But here's the question: who defines these reforms, and who truly benefits when change comes? Food for thought. And as always, Africa is speaking. Let's get to it.
Hello and welcome to Africa Speaks on Pan-African Television. I am Vicky Wilson, and this is your Word of the Day segment where language meets liberation. Today's word is reforms, a term that often sounds like progress, but in the African context demands a closer look. Let's unpack what lies beneath the surface of the so-called reforms and why across the continent people are choosing resistance over rhetorics. Reforms are the language of delay and policy tweaks meant to pacify and not to transform. In Africa, reforms often functions as a tool of containment, small changes to keep big systems intact. They are promises of progress without structural change or economic redistribution, driven more by donor expectations than people's needs. Colonial regimes used reforms to soften the image of occupation, indirect rule, limited education, and token councils. It wasn't liberation, it was an extension of colonialism with a slightly different face. After independence, this logic remained what Frantz Fanon referred to as flagged independence. The 1980s saw IMF and World Bank economic reforms that hollowed out the state, such as public services. State assets were privatized, loans were handed out with conditions that benefited the IMF and the elite, and deepened dependency. These structural adjustment programs were framed as necessary medicine. In truth, they were economic shock therapy designed to make African economies safe for foreign capital and not sovereign development. In Kenya, these reforms led to mass layoffs, unfunded schools, and skyrocketing inequality. Nairobi became a city of gated communities and informal settlement. Today, the promises of the 2010 constitutions are undermined by land capture and elite impunity, prove that even progressive reforms can be neutralized by entrenched power. According to Africa, the pattern repeats. In Mozambique, natural gas governance reforms accompanied militarizations and displacement. In Rwanda, gender reforms gained global praise while dissent is criminalized. In Senegal, youth demand jobs and justice, while politicians offer reforms written in Paris. This is the danger of reformism. It asks us to manage a colonial economy more efficiently instead of dismantling it. It offers transparency in mining contracts, but not local control. It offers carbon offset programs while forests are seized and communities evicted. But resistance is growing. In Niger, the CNSP-led government is nationalizing electricity and uranium. And in Mali, the government is making huge gains in the mining sector, with the state taking back control of the country's gold mines. In Burkina Faso, the Ibrahim Traoré-led government is leading an agricultural offensive where land is being farmed for the benefit of the people. In Ghana, young people reject IMF austerity disguised as fiscal reforms. In Kenya, coastal communities are pushing back against mega infrastructure projects that threatens livelihood. Also in Kenya, we have all witnessed the mass youth-led uprising against the IMF-backed finance bill. And in South Africa, land justice movement demand redistribution, not just title deeds. Pan-Africanism and socialism reminds us that concrete structural change is necessary if we want to truly prioritize people over profit and move forward in a way that benefits the majority of people. In Africa, the Alliance of Sahel States is leading on this front. A concrete change is not trapped in slogans. The people are benefiting now in a practical, tangible way. The goal today is not inclusion in a broken system. The goal is to build a new one based on the foundation put forward by people like Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah, the principles of Pan-Africanism and socialism. We are not asking for adjustment or reforms. We are organizing for liberation and true emancipation. I am Vicky Wilson, and this has been the Word of the Day segment of Africa Speaks on Pan-African Television. Enjoy the rest of the show.
But before we go, we take a moment to remember the movements that paved the way for the Africa we continue to fight for today. In this week's history segment, we return to Kenya, to the spirit of resistance that runs deep in its soil. The Mau Mau Revolution was a militant anti-colonial uprising in the 1950s, where Kenyan freedom fighters rose against British colonial rule. It was a really brutal, bloody resistance. One fought in forests, in villages, and cities by ordinary men and women, determined to reclaim their land, their dignity, and their future. Though suppressed and vilified for decades, the Mau Mau's sacrifice laid the groundwork for Kenyans' eventual independence in 1963. And today, many see echoes of their bravery in the young protesters flooding Kenya's streets once again. History reminds us that the fight for justice is never new, it is inherited. Here's a full feature on the Mau Mau Revolution.
The hundreds of thousands of youth protesting police repression in Kenya today are inspired by a glorious history of resistance against British colonialism. The armed rebellion of the Kenyan Land and Freedom Army, which is referred to as the Mau Mau Rebellion, was one of the milestones in Kenya's march to freedom. The uprising began in 1952 and continued till 1960 and was met with a fierce repression by the British colonial authorities. The Kenyan Land and Freedom Army Rebellion was centered on three core principles: land, freedom, and self-governance. It was born out of decades of colonial policies that displaced the people from their lands and forced them to work on lands of the colonialists for a pittance. Led by iconic revolutionaries such as Dedan Kimathi, the KLFA organized itself through a network of guerrilla fighters, rural support structures, and underground urban cells. From forest bases in Aberdare and Mount Kenya regions, fighters launched attacks against settler farms, colonial administrators, and loyalist collaborators. Colonial authorities responded with mass detention, torture, and widespread execution. more than 1.5 million people were interned in concentration camps or resettlement villages during the emergency period between 1952 and 1960. Among them, nearly 160,000 and 320,000 were detained in brutal conditions in concentration camps. After a fierce struggle, Kimathi was captured and executed in 1957. The exact spot where he was buried remains unknown to this day. The rebellion may have suppressed, but its spirit lived on, and soon. The British were forced to leave Kenya in 1963. In the following decades, independent governments sought to suppress the story and the struggles of the Kenyan Land and Freedom Army. They failed, and to this day, leftist and Pan-African forces in Kenya and across the continent honor Kimathi and the heroes of the Kenyan Land and Freedom Army. As young Kenyans battle the agents of imperialism today, they carry the banners of the rebellion that shook the mighty British Empire. Until today, Kenya continues to lift up the name of freedom fighters such as Dedan Kimathi, who stand as a reference point for all people in struggle against imperialism across Kenya. 18 February marks Dedan Kimathi Day, where comrades have made a revolutionary effort to reclaim his true legacy within the context of the continued struggle for national liberation now.
And that's where we leave it for this edition of Africa Speaks, a continent in motion, a people refusing silence, and a history that reminds us we've always known how to resist. From the streets of Nairobi to the protests in Cairo, Cape Town, and beyond, Africa is speaking and the world must listen. My name is Makiza Micheline Latifa. Thank you for sharing your time with us. Until next week, stay bold, stay true to yourself, and never stop speaking truth to power. See you soon.